Okay, so starting on this April Fool's Day in 2013, I'm going to start a series of phone interviews with, starting with my dad, to try to capture some of the oral history of my family. So
Okay.
one of the stories that, and this is Bill Sommerville, my dad. I'm Chuck Sommerville. One of the stories that, Dad, that you've told me in the past that I found really fascinating, it's the story of how your father met your mother.
Okay.
Tell me about that.
Well, first of all, my father was born in 1896 and grew up in, I call it backwoods, West Virginia. And when he got out,
what's your father's name?
His name was Howard Hoy Sommerville, Howard H.
Okay.
And he managed to get from his little farm near Glenville, West Virginia, to Glenville College, or they call it the normal school at that time, which was basically a teacher's college. So that's how he got his teacher's degree. Okay. After he got his teacher's degree, I guess he probably, well, let's see, first of all, he was in the First World War. Came back from that, finished his degree, I guess, and got a job teaching nearby in the town there, a little town called Sand Fork, West Virginia. So I think it's the little Kanawha River up there. But anyhow, he was teaching, I don't know what I was teaching. His main thing later on was vocational agriculture, but he was teaching in his school, and I guess he taught several different classes. And it wasn't that big a high school, but anyhow, my mother was going to school there, and she was probably, as I understand, maybe the only girl that didn't have a class to him, or from him, shall we say. And she was kind of a little bit of a redhead, not a real bright redhead. He noticed her as being probably a good-looking little girl. Well, she wasn't that little, I guess. She was 18. Probably think she was a senior in high school at the time. And anyhow, he got to talking to her, and they liked each other pretty well, I guess. He's 11 years older than she is. So he's teaching in high school where she's going to school. So he asked her if she could go to the county fair with him.
So was that considered scandalous at the time to be interested in somebody so much younger than you?
Well, the scandalous part would be that the teacher is trying to date a student, I think.
Okay.
Not so much the difference in age, because that might happen in a particular society, actually. But anyhow, he, in the process of asking her, he says, "Well, you'll have to ask my dad. I can't tell you that I can go," because there was, it was still a pretty prim and proper period of time back there. So my dad, having been in the First World War, and he saw the motorized vehicles there, you got to understand, most everybody was still using horses and buggies and stuff back even in this time. We're talking about 1918, 1920, someplace in there. Let's see. It'd be about 1928. So there probably were a few cars on the road by that time. He had a car, so he, I guess, took her home from school maybe on a Friday night and walked up to the door and shook hands with her dad, and they were both Masons, and being a Mason, okay, you could take my daughter out on a date, because as I understand, Masons say, your daughter I will treat like she was my daughter, okay?
Okay.
And that's how it happened. So that's how they had their first date. I'm not sure exactly how long it was till they got married, but that's how he met her, which is kind of interesting. So I say, being 11 years difference, it's kind of a stretch, but not that unusual in that particular time, I don't think.
Okay, so can you tell me a little more about your father and his teaching? Because I understand that he was kind of innovative as a teacher.
Well, he was kind of like we call it trying to ride the wave of technology back there. Like I say, he did come from a farm where they basically ran the farm. Like I say, he had a rifle, a single shot muzzle loading rifle that he used to help get meat for the table back there. So there, understand, his family was not that high tech, But anyhow, the his brother, to give you a hint how they got, his brother actually got out and became an accountant and started a Sommerville company in Huntington, which is one of the largest accounting firms in West Virginia. So there was some opportunity for them to get out and get some education. So, all right. So he got his education in, I say, school, but he got it also. He was being a farmer. He got his main course was vocational agriculture, which is helping teach the boys some new technologies and new ideas about teaching about growing stuff on farms. After all, this was pretty much a farming community where he was. Okay. And that I don't know if they're still teaching vocational agriculture around the state now or not, but anyhow, he was kind of in on that. And the good thing about that was, even during the Depression, when most people didn't have a job, he had a school teacher's job, but he actually got paid 12 months out of the year instead of 9 months like most teachers, because summertime he spent time out in the fields with the boys, supervising and talking with them about what they were doing. So he got that. Well, to help that out, he also was interested in photography. He got a 35 millimeter, I think it was a pretty good brand back at that time. It was Argus C3 camera, and you could do 35 millimeter. It came in black and white or color, and he got that, and he took a lot of pictures on our farm of my older sisters doing things, planting things or doing certain things in the field or whatever, and had worked up a script that went along with that. So actually, he was kind of innovative in doing what we would call today audio-visual education, right? Okay. You put on a screen and you have a script you can read. That's audio-visual. So he actually got his master's degree in that. And but being a farmer, farmers used to have to know so many things to actually operate a farm, because things break down. You got to be able to fix them. So he had learned. I guess he learned all this on his own, or at least learned how to do a lot of metal work. He knew how to form metal and make tubes and stuff. He knew how to weld. He had the machinery in a machine shop at the school that he could use that he could help make things with. And actually made I call it a giant size garden tractor. One you walk along behind, but you use it out in the garden to help till the soil. He made that out of a big old motor and a transmission and a rear end out of an old car someplace. And it was a little bit too top heavy, so it didn't really work. But yeah, that's innovative, I think, doing that type of thing. And of course, he had some woodworking, I guess some chemistry. I think he even taught some math. I'm not sure what all he taught, but the innovative thing I thought was the photography and using the script with that.
So, as I recall, so he was wasn't he kind of into ham radio at one point, a hobby that I think you took up?
Well, yes, he did. Even back on the farm when I was just a kid, 6 or 7 years old when we left there, but before that, he had a room back on the backside of a building that was actually an office from an old general store that was actually on the property. And back in that room, he set up his ham radio shop, and I remember seeing the equipment back there. And Dad tried to explain it to me. Of course, I didn't understand it, but he tried to explain how radio tubes work, and it was beyond my abilities at the time. We did the only entertainment we really handled on the farm at that time was either a phonograph or we had radio, because we had electricity. A lot of people in our neighborhood didn't have electricity on the farm when I was growing up there, but so we had radio, and so we had pretty good entertainment back in, we're talking about the late 30s, and but he got into ham radio, and he never really got any part of his license at that time. And later on in life, after he retired, he worked for the Veterans Administration for several years, helping veterans find farms and so on to buy as they came back from the Second World War and so on. So he was part of that, again, in agriculture, if you want to put it that way. But when he retired from that, he bought some used radio equipment and set him up a ham radio outfit, and actually got his amateur radio license not first class. It was a novice class. He actually got that done and had his call letters and the whole works, and did do some talking to some people around the United States, and it was a pretty neat hobby. This is still running. That's where we had the super electronics we have today. It was all off of tube-operated machines, and it really worked well. I think the receiver he had was a war surplus radio receiver from a tank, a World War II tank. It could reach lots of different frequencies, and so that's why it was very valuable to ham radio people. And
I remember seeing that equipment when I was a kid. At one point,
yeah, I had it
in our house.
I actually set it up, but I never did at that point in time really get into the hobby. I didn't really have anybody to kind of lead me into it at that time, and of course later on I did get into ham radio, but basically it was just the so-called handy talkie. It's kind of like a walkie-talkie, and it's but I do have a license. I still have my license for the ham radio, but partly that was because of my dad. And he influenced me a little bit. And he had it operating pretty good there at Barbersville, the house where he lives here in Barbersville. And I would go there and sit with him a little bit and see him operate. But it's quite a different hobby from most things. So you have to know some technologies, and you have to at least be able to answer questions on tests and so on to show that you do know the knowledge. You can't just plug them in and operate them. In most cases, like even I had to go through a 100 test question series, and had to get like 98 of them or something like that out of 100 right, something like that, to get my license. And all these things included frequencies and how you build a transmitter, or how you build a power supply. You had to know how to do those things. So a lot of the hobbyists at that time were still doing that as part of their hobby. And they might have the plans for them, but they still had to be able to put them together. And so most of the stuff today is already built, pre-built, ready to plug in and talk on. But there's still a few hobbyists that dig in electronics and do some things.
So while we're talking about your parents,
mm-hmm.
so you mentioned that your mother was going to the school. Now, as I understand, this wasn't just that she left home every day and went to school and came back. It was a bit more of a hassle for her. Can you tell me about that?
Yeah, that's to me the most interesting thing about the whole situation about her going to high school. In fact, first of all, her father was a school teacher, and I called him a itinerant school teacher. He taught basically on farms, pretty good sized farms in the area down in southern West Virginia, out through Greenbrier County and places like that. His job would be to teach. We have 3 or 4 families that worked a farm, and then the farm owner had children. So he had to teach the children on the farm because state law required them to go to school at that point until they were 16. And a lot of the schools were too far away for them to transport. Basically, back in the early years, there weren't buses out there to transport the kids to school. And so my mother and her brother, he was a year younger than she was, or thereabouts, he taught them, I guess. He could teach up to the 8th grade as his qualification, my grandfather, okay? And that was, she went to school, or at least probably to him, at a little school someplace there, wherever the farm was that they were living on, because they lived on the farm. And as a matter of fact, I found out that not only did he teach, my grandmother cooked the meals for the farm hands on the farm. So it's kind of like running a ranch, if you see on these western ranch things where you have a cook and so on. She did the cooking and he did the teaching, and maybe he even did the books for the farmer. I'm not sure, but anyhow, he put my mother and her younger brother in the same class and brought them up through school side by side in the same class. Well, he insisted on all his kids getting out and getting a high school education. And the place they were at that point in time was maybe not too distant from this Sand Fork High School, but it would be a good hard walk, maybe a couple-hour walk or something like that if you had to walk it. And the easiest way to get there was to take a small, and I'm talking about real small, paddle wheeler boat on that little river down there. It wasn't that deep, wasn't that wide, okay? But anyhow, I understand from some other sources that it went all the way to Glenville, which is just farther upriver from where they were, and they could walk to where they could catch the boat, not too distant from where they were living, and ride the boat for maybe an hour up the river to get to Sand Fork, the little town of Sand Fork, and then they would get off there, and they would do that on like Sunday nights, and they went to a boarding house and stayed at the boarding house all week, and they went back home on Friday nights. The thing about that was they only had one room, and they shared the room. Now, we're talking about teenagers in high school, 4 years of high school, and they shared a room by putting a sheet down the center of the room for privacy, and had 2 beds in there, and that's how they got their high school education, by doing that and going to school, to this little school where my dad taught. And that, to me, is a very interesting story. I mean, that's a tough way to get your high school education. But anyhow, it's a true story. It sounded like something made up, but believe me, the way things were back in the the early part of the 20th century, that would be maybe a semi-typical thing to do, is find some way of getting to school, maybe staying there, like you said. But I think that's most of that story. But it's just kind of strange. Heck, you can't get kids even to go to school today, and they did all this for 4 years.
Now, earlier you mentioned that your dad was in the Civil War. This is the first time I've heard about that. Do you know any more about that?
Did I say Civil War? I'm sorry, I didn't mean Civil War. It's the First World War.
Oh, I'm sorry. That's probably my mistake. It probably wasn't Civil War. That goes way too back. Oh, so he was in the First World War. Okay, so can you tell me more about that?
Yes. First of all, my dad, after he got through his high school and so on, and went to college, he kind of determined that he thought he wanted to be a surgeon, a doctor, a surgeon. And so he was actually starting to take some classes, I guess, at WU, maybe, I'm not sure, which wasn't too far from where he lived, a couple of days' travel by horseback or whatever at that point in time. But he was wanting to be a doctor. Well, because of that, when he got in the Army, somehow he managed to talk him into making him a medic out in we're talking about on the battlefield, okay? The guy that goes out and grabs the people who've been shot and injured and hauls them back to the hospital, right? And so, not only that, he also worked in the hospital on the operating table. So that's what a medic would do, either one or both of those things, okay? And so I'm not sure what year he joined the Army and so on like that, but he was over in France and on some of those battles that they had in the First World War, pretty nasty stuff over there. And he got his kind of his stomach full, if you want to call it that, of war and gore and having to take care of really serious injuries and so on. And after that, he decided he didn't really want to be a surgeon. That was just too much for him. I think he had a better opportunity to be in a better position, like a emergency room or something like that. He might have done better, but that's pretty bad stuff when you're dealing with those things. And also we're talking about like a MASH unit. If you remember MASH on TV, we're talking about a frontline hospital situation where they're just minutes from the front line, from where the battle's actually going on. They're hearing all this going on. There's actually bombs occasionally dropping around near them, and so it wasn't your typical hospital by any means. And but that's what he did in the First World War. And as I say, they had motorized units, which probably included some ambulances to help get people off the field. And that's where he got the idea of, hey, I got to have a car when I get back. So, but he probably bought one of the, I won't say one of the first cars, but you figure that the war was over about 1918, something like that. I'm figuring about 1920 or thereabouts, he probably bought a car, that would have been a fairly, most of the cars kind of got started in the United States around about 1900 at the very earliest. So we're talking about 20 years into the invention of the automobile, basically. He got a car, and that's another story that I could tell you about a little bit.
Well, we'll come back to that one later, probably in another interview. But let's bookmark that one. So I understand. While we're talking about the war, now, didn't your family move to Akron during World War II?
That's correct. Yes, we left the farm. and I'm not sure what the reason was why he left that school or what, but he for some reason decided to quit teaching, and we moved to Akron, Ohio, and stayed in a so-called temporary housing up there that was supposed to have been maybe for the duration of the war, how long that was going to be. They were kind of prefab homes that they put up, and Dad worked for the Goodyear Aircraft Company, and everybody knows about Goodyear and their blimps, and of course they make tires and so on, but they actually had of course a lot of companies did a lot of different things during the war than what they normally did. They got a contract to build, I think it was from Grumman, I think that's who manufactured or designed the plane, the F-4F or what it is, the FU-4 I think it is. Anyhow, it was the Corsair that's for the Navy, the kind of gull wing looking thing that it was very modern at the time. And so he worked in that plant, and he got him a job there as a inspector of parts, because he had his own micrometers and stuff. He had assembled a bunch of tools, and he had his own set of really nice micrometers, and those things were kind of in short supply at that point in time, because everybody in the world around the world, around the United States, was trying to get them all together to build, set up new plants and so on. So he got to be a parts inspector out on the line, and my mother had the only job I ever knew her to really have in a job situation. She worked in the office there, the personnel office, I guess it's a plant. So both of them did do part of their job was to help them that out, to help the war out. And it's a big city compared to a little town of Lost Creek, West Virginia, where I grew up. I noticed the other day I looked up the population of Lost Creek today. It's about 947 right now. So it wasn't that big then, okay? And well, we lived on a farm outside of town, but the town, it's just a little town. And anyhow, you take a kid from the country and stick him in a big city, and he's lost up there, you know? You have a whole different series of expected things from a person, social-wise, that you didn't have in the little country town, okay? And I met up with the idea of gangs, and not the gangs we know of today, but they were still gangs. And you try to join for your own protection. You try to join some group just to have some backup, right? So we ended up in such things as BB gun battles and throwing dirt wads at each other and things like that. But it wasn't anything real serious. No real guns or anything involved in it. But it was a strange world to me at that time, I tell you.
So if you can tell me a little more of your experience in Akron. I remember before you telling me about how amazed you were at seeing the airplanes flying out of the plant.
Oh, yeah, well, that's true. With this plant, we lived at this area, and it was a little knoll. I wouldn't really call it a hill, between us and the aircraft manufacturing plant and the blimp hangar up there where all the blimps were. And if you walked up to the top of the hill about less than a quarter of a mile from my house, you could look down a little bit downhill to that place and actually see the airplanes. But the first day I was there, about daybreak, I was probably still sleeping, and maybe it was a weekend, I don't know. But anyhow, all of a sudden I hear this roar overhead, a big, loud roar, and I thought, what in the world is that? And couldn't make it out in my mind what it would be. And so we had breakfast, and I went out on the street to see if I could find any new people to play with out there. I was only 7 years old, I guess. And while we're out there on the street, overhead comes this roaring airplane about 300 feet above me, because they didn't have much time to get altitude before we got to where we were from that runway. And it possibly was doing the 250 to 300 miles an hour, because those planes could easily do that. And it was their first flight off the runway from a brand new plane being built, coming to our heads. And this went on, I would say maybe 20 in a day's time. They were talking about day and night. At least 20 of those planes would come out of that plant and fly overhead. And that's pretty exciting to a young guy who the only thing he knew about airplanes were putt biplanes around the sky back where I lived. I used to see a few of those around there. And So I suddenly came into, although the airplane was invented in the 20th century, I suddenly came into the 20th century updated anyhow with the most modern plane there was. Actually, at that point in time, it may have been the fastest plane in the sky, a fighter plane at least. And that was rather exciting for a young kid to see that kind of power go overhead.
So this interview's been really good. I think things have gone well. Is there anything else you want to add to what we've talked about so far?
Well, yeah, maybe a little bit. Like I said, when talk about things in Akron, as far as our little gangs went, well, when they built our subdivision, they put straw like they still do today down over the grass to hold the grass seed down until you got a chance to dig in and start growing. And they had bales of straw, and when it got done, there was a whole stack. It would have been like a couple of truckloads up on the top of this knoll back there. And so a bunch of us kids decided we could move those around a little bit and make it look like a house or a hideout in there, a gang place, so a place to hide, go in bad weather. It was warm inside, and if it rained, it didn't usually come through. So we had almost an all-weather place to play, and that was ours. And this other gang that I knew about was maybe 6 or 8 blocks away, and they had dug underground and had their place down in tunnels under an empty lot. And they actually propped it up, I guess, from what I understand, like you would a coal miner. You would prop up the walls and the roof. But thinking kids were doing that, it's a wonder nobody got killed with something falling in on them, But, they would occasionally attack our fort, and we'd occasionally go down and do something to their place. And one time they decided to finish it all off, and they set fire to that bunch of bales of hay, which took about too far to put the whole thing out when it really took off burning, because that was the end of our hideout. But that was just a hint of what the world was like for a young guy in that period of time. Like I said, coming out of a little farm town to a big city, and Akron is a big city. Was then and still is, of course. And that's a pretty exciting part.